Director, thank you for appearing. Thank you for the extraordinary job that you're doing. Please convey our thanks to the men and women at the Bureau for their incredible work. I've worked with them since I was an assistant U.S. attorney more than 30 years ago. Let me start with a threshold question I'm curious about. When I applied to be an assistant U.S. attorney, I had to go through a background check. Do candidates for the FBI have to go through background checks?
Yes.
Would someone with dozens of felony convictions survive a background check for the Bureau?
No.
So they would never be hired by the Bureau?
No.
Well, clearly the Bureau has, you don't have to comment on this, I know you won't, but clearly the Bureau has higher standards for their hiring than one of America's great political parties. Let me turn to the events of the tragic shooting. Have you been able to gain access to the shooter's electronic communications, social media, and with the caveats that you mentioned that the investigation is still early, have you been able to make any deductions or are there any indications of the shooter's motivation from those electronic holdings?
So in terms of our ability to access it, we have been able to get into and exploit a number of electronic devices, digital devices, but not all of them yet. And then within his various accounts, we've been able to get access to some of them, but some of them we're still waiting on. Some of them we may never get access to because of the encryption issue, that it presents an increasingly vexing barrier for law enforcement, not just the FBI, but for law enforcement all over the country. But we're still drilling into that. We have some information. Some places we've been able to look. Some places we will be able to look. Some places we may never be able to see, no matter how good our legal process is. But that's what we're looking at right now. In terms of what we've been able to find so far, a lot of the usual repositories of information have not yielded anything notable in terms of motive or like ideology. Having said that, it does appear fairly clear that he was interested in public figures, kind of more broadly, and I think this is important, that starting somewhere around July 6th or so, he became very focused on former President Trump and this rally. And so one of the things that I can share here today that has not been shared yet is that we've just in the last couple of days found that from our review, to your point about devices, analysis of a laptop that the investigation ties to the shooter reveals that on July 6th, he did a Google search for, quote, how far away was Oswald from Kennedy? And so that's a search that obviously is significant in terms of his state of mind. That is the same day that it appears that he registered for the Butler rally.
And when you say that his electronic holdings indicated an interest in different public figures, without revealing anything you're not comfortable revealing about those public figures, can you tell us anything generally about them, either the offices they hold, their political party, or was it simply people of a high profile?
Well, a couple things. First, the images that we've recovered so far from, I can't remember which of his various devices, appeared to be what we call cached images from searches of news articles. So if you do a news article search, of course, if there are photos on it, those photos get stored automatically in your cache, as opposed to me searching or him searching for a specific person and getting up images of that person. As far as the pictures that are like that, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rhyme or reason to it so far, other than these are all prominent public people, but they cover both parties, they cover both U.S. people and even some foreign public officials. So that part doesn't appear to, that one repository of information doesn't appear to be overly indicative of motive, other than interest in public figures, but that could be just because he was reading news stories. So we're still trying to drill into that. That's why all of these outstanding legal process returns that we're waiting on for various accounts, platforms, et cetera, you know, any one of them could be one that would have very indicative, very important information.
If I could be permitted one very short additional question, Chairman. From that, any indication of any other particular target, that is someone who was not just sort of generically the subject of the searches you described, but for which there was more of an interest than others?
There's the information I just described at the moment does not appear particularly indicative of targeting in its own right. But again, that dot, once we get other information, could connect in a way that might be more meaningful. But I'm sharing that piece of information with this committee and with the American public, but I think it's important that we put down a qualification. This does not appear to be some kind of target list or something like that. This is cached images from running searches of news stories. And again, there's nothing at the moment, there's no pattern from that particular piece of information that is overly remarkable so far.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Director, you previously told us that you consider the situation on the southern border to be a massive security threat to our country. Is that still your assessment?
I stand by my prior testimony, and in fact, just in the last month or so, we've done, conducted a significant series of arrests. I say we, our Joint Terrorism Task Force is working with ICE of a number of individuals with suspected international terrorism ties. And I have also been very vocal about the fact that since the last time I appeared before you, that we are increasingly concerned about the possibility not just of a foreign terrorist-inspired attack, which is very much a concern, but even the potential for a coordinated foreign terrorist attack, perhaps like what we've seen against the concert hall in Russia, for example, but just here in the United States.
Well, the 19 suicide bombers who overstayed visas were responsible for 3,000 American deaths on 9/11. What's your best estimate of the number of foreign terrorists who are now in our country?
I don't know that I could give you that number. What I can tell you is we have lots of foreign terrorism-related investigations, but that doesn't mean that all of them came in, illegally or anything like that.
It seems to me that the simplest act of terrorism would be for dozens of guerrillas to attack low-security, high-density venues, for example, Friday night high school football games all across the country at the same hour, with bombs and automatic weapons. That would produce thousands of casualties from coast to coast in a matter of minutes. How likely is such a scenario?
Well, what you're describing would require, of course, a lot of coordination. But what I will tell you, and I think you're onto a particularly important point from my perspective, which is that unlike the 9/11 attacks, which, again, I was in FBI headquarters on the day of 9/11, and so I remember it vividly, and I've spent plenty of time in the period after that in my prior positions engaged with the families and the victims. But what we're seeing more and more with the foreign terrorist threat, and frankly also the domestic terrorism threat, is a focus on kind of like what you're talking about, well, what I would call soft targets, which is really for the American people's benefit, just intelligence community speak for where everyday people live their everyday lives.
What terrorist groups have now infiltrated our country that you're tracking?
Well, I don't know that I would say infiltrated. We have investigations as we speak that relate to ISIS and its affiliates. We have investigations as we speak that relate to Al-Qaeda. We have investigations as we speak that relate to Al-Shabaab. We have investigations as we speak that relate to the Iranian proxies, Hezbollah, and so frankly, even the IRGC Quds Force itself.
What foreign criminal gangs are now in our country that you're most concerned with?
Well, foreign criminal gangs, I mean, we obviously have investigations, a lot of investigations into, gangs like MS-13, for example, and some of its counterparts. Although I think if you were to talk to most chiefs and sheriffs like I'm doing every week, we shouldn't underestimate how prevalent neighborhood gangs are, really. It's a lot of the gang violence that...
Well, I'm concerned about those that we've allowed in through the southern border and what threat they are now posing. Do you believe that the vetting performed at the southwest border is adequate to ensure that aliens with terrorist or criminal gang ties are not being released into the United States?
Well, it's not really for me to speak to the vetting. What I would tell you is that...
you have to deal with it once they're released into the United States.
And one of the concerns that I have, which I touched on briefly in my opening, is there's been a lot of focus on the number of known or suspected terrorists encountered at the border, and that number has increased over the last 5 or 6 years, and that should be of concern. But frankly, to me, the bigger concern is individuals who weren't either weren't on the watch list at the time they came in because there wasn't information known yet that ties them to terrorism, and it's only after they get in that some new piece of information develops somewhere overseas, and now we know. That's a bigger concern.
We've been warned that they basically vet against a blank sheet of paper. If they don't have a record in this country, Border Patrol probably doesn't have any record. They're released into the country, and you find out later of the dangers.
Or if they use fake documents and there aren't biometrics to connect them. Sometimes there are people who come in who, because of the nature of the threat information that puts somebody on the watch list, there wasn't, fingerprints from the person at the time, because not every piece of intelligence comes with fingerprints. So then the guy comes in using fake ID,
and of course,
there's no reason to connect them.
And of course, the 2 million gotaways you know absolutely nothing about.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know about absolutely nothing, because we may come across them in other things. I mean, one of the key parts of our collective defense here is that we work with 800,000 sworn law enforcement across the country, and we train them on the right questions to ask and things like that, so that we can build in additional eyes and ears if they, do a traffic stop or whatever happens to be. We run a greater chance of leveraging all that to pick up people who may have slipped through the cracks.